experts and stakeholders are advocating for the de-escalation of divisive narratives and profiling in the news reportage and discussions on conflict and counter-terrorism operations across the country. So there was a meeting today, and the appeal is made today at a two-day workshop by the National Counterterrorism Center to train media practitioners to train on current affairs analysts on the need to use responsible terminologies when discussing or reporting conflict. Take a listen to some of the speakers.
Sustainable security cannot be achieved through kinetic measures alone, but must be anchored on prevention, trust building, and responsible communication. It is within this context that issues of stereotyping and ethnic profiling becomes particularly relevant. These challenges, if not properly addressed, have the potential to undermine intelligence cooperation, weaken community trust, and create unintended barriers between security institutions and the very population.
That conversation is a two-day conversation which is very critical, especially going into an election. Those stereotypes and those narratives and definitions of groups, interests are very key, and these are issues that raise attention actually. And the title or the focus of the conversation is contextualizing definitions and terminologies to address stereotyping and ethnic profiling in discourses and security operations in West Africa. Beacon Security Company is behind this, and Dr. Kabir Adamu is really behind it, and it's live for us here in our studio. Thanks so much, Dr. Adamu, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Why is this important at this time?
Mainly because the platforms for spreading hate messaging, stereotyping, profiling have increased. In the past, it used to be traditionally word of mouth, the usual messaging type. But in today's world, social media, as an example, has made it extremely easy to spread these issues. And given the circumstances that we have in Nigeria, the political divisions, the ethnic divisions, the religious divisions, these issues have become extremely profound. And of course, we are about to hold an election. And traditionally, during election cycles in Nigeria, these issues are sometimes used to mobilize. And that is why you find out that the violence increases just before the elections. And then after the elections, the winner would have to spend time to manage and contain the consequences of those messaging. And that's why we thought to focus on these issues, highlight them, but more importantly, proffer solutions. So one of the outcomes of this conference is to produce a toolkit that would guide discussions and then at the same time, of course, support security operations. One of what we did was to bring the ambassador of Rwanda, the High Commissioner of Rwanda, to Nigeria to speak to the conference. Remember that there was a genocide in Rwanda in 1994 that led to about 800 to 1 million deaths. And so during his speech, he spoke about his country's experiences, what led to that unfortunate experience, and more importantly, what his government did to achieve the enviable position that Rwanda has at the moment in
Let's give an example of what this kind of stereotypes or stereotyping could be, so our Nigerians can have a contextual understanding of what we're talking about here and how dangerous it is.
So one of the things that shocked everyone, including us, the organizers, is that nobody in the audience that we invited was not a victim of one or the other form of stereotyping. And that is the extent to which stereotyping has eaten deep into the Nigerian context. I'll give you an example. It's so bad that one of the attendees mentioned that even to get a job, his personality, his identity can determine where he would get a job. If you are going to put your kids in school, the identity that your kids have would determine where they will put to school. And so one of the things that came out is all of this now puts pressure on government in such a way that even policy formulation sometimes will be decided by some of these identities. We have not spoken about gender and the consequences, the association of gender with that identity. So a lot of, virtually everybody in one way or the other, it could be your religion, it could be your ethnicity, it could be even your color, your skin type. So all of that reflected in the conversations that we're having. But most of what came out is how certain crimes are associated with certain ethnic identities. As an example, Fulani had a terrorist, Igbo, you know, IPOP, and you know, the secessionist agitation by IPOP, how it has now been associated. Someone also mentioned issues of you know, crimes by Nigerians abroad, and when they are being deported, sometimes the identities of the deportees are also mentioned, so it becomes now an associated activity. But we're also very careful in acknowledging that crimes do occur, and sometimes the individuals behind those crimes have identity. But what the conversation now brought out is, should it be the crime that we should focus on, or the identity of the crime? And then more importantly, what are we going to learn, for instance, from the identity of those who are perpetrating the crime? So all of those conversations did come out.
Although we're hearing now that President Bola Tinubu is expected to visit Plateau State, there is an initial plan for the president to travel to Ogun State, to Ikperu, Ogun State tomorrow to flag off operations at the Gateway International Cargo Airport. Instead, the president will now head to Jos in Plateau State to commiserate with the government and people of the state over the recent gun attacks which claimed the lives of innocent citizens. From Plateau State, the president will now travel to Lagos to observe the Good Friday, and on Saturday the president will travel to Ogun State for the commissioning of the cargo airport and the inauguration of 2 commercial aircraft for the export and import of goods aimed at boosting the state economic growth. The president will return to Lagos to continue the Easter holiday, during which he is also expected to commission infrastructure projects undertaken by the administration of Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, some of which include Ojota-Okpebi Link Bridge, the Lagos State Geographic Information System building, the multi-agency complex named after the president, and a school complex. This is President Tinubu's itinerary between the next few days. But, I mean, this toolkit that is basically on messaging, communication, and changing the narrative in this stereotyping, this toolkit has been released just yet?
No. That's what we are going to validate. We're hoping that the framework will be developed as part of the conference. It will be validated by experts, by security personnel, and then, of course, it would be handed over to the relevant bodies to do the next stage, which is to own it. So Ministry of Information, as an example. Of course, the members of National Assembly did attend. We're hoping that they can pick from it and turn it into some kind of law. And then hopefully it would also be handed over through the NCTC, the National Counterterrorism Center, to the Office of the National Security Advisor, and perhaps some form of policy will come out of that.
There's going to be a lot of work. I assume that you're Fulani, aren't you? Are you?
I am partly Fulani.
Fulani, okay. Yeah. So as soon as you say Fulani, and when we're growing up, and I mean, even when in the youth service, that I met some Igbo friends of mine who say, Omo Yoruba, and the way they say it, Omo Yoruba, jati, you know. I mean, there's a way, a manner in which, across jokingly, you know, with some humor, we have made, and you see, an Hausa man, you say Aboki, you know, those kind of stereotyping.
Those anecdotes that you mentioned,
absolutely,
they came out. So this is it's a journey. We started this journey since last year, and it's in partnership with another organization, WISER, by retired General Saleh Bala. We started this journey since last year. We were supported by UK8, the program called Spring, and that's where we are. In one of the convenience we did, which was virtual, we brought in people from the rural areas, victims of all of this stereotyping that has led to violence of different types, and we harnessed through research some of these anecdotes And it is, like I said, because it's a journey over time, all of this was now presented at the conference. I mean, one of the amazing things that came out of the conference today is the experiences of virtually everybody. Someone who grew up in the barracks immediately after the Civil War in Nigeria also gave his experiences, what he suffered as his family, what he also had that was being mentioned. Women who were subjected to different types of stereotyping also gave their experiences. Religious stereotyping, because of course we had clerics too who came from the two divides. They also gave their own submissions. But then there were gray areas that came up. The cyberspace as an example, Sheung. Then the religious space. Today, if you go on social media or even these free-to-air channels, there are religious clerics who preach with no form of regulation. So all of that came up. The consequence, for instance, of social media platforms that have community rules that are not in any way consistent with our local laws also came up during the conversation. So the issue of digital accountability was also discussed, and we kind of highlighted what other countries are doing. So all of that. So it's like you rightly said, it's wide, but the beauty of it is that it was an open conversation. Yeah. Every anecdote was listened to, even when security organizations in particular carry out certain actions. An organization would bring out a new unit, and for instance, they will call it, agro rangers. And the perception, for instance, to the herder is that those agro rangers are only protecting farmers. Who is going to protect him? The pastoralist, who is the victim of cattle rustling. So all of conversations like that also came out. But I think the most important thing is the freeness with which people discussed. And then, of course, they were highlighted. In selecting the participants, or rather in inviting the participants, we considered different components. We made sure there was inclusion. We made sure, for instance, there were women, there were, in terms of the religion, the two religions attended. Of course, in identifying victims, we also made sure different crime types, farmer herder, violence, terrorism, all of that, it was considered. So it was quite inclusive.
For you as an expert, going into this election, and there will be a lot of this stereotyping that will happen also, especially on social media, and those,
beyond social media, Sheung.
Absolutely, beyond
even in conventional media.
But you've seen over the last few years, Dr. Kabir, how social media has become the battleground of ethnic profiling, ethnic attacks, and political dissents that have now become so vile, so extreme and so negative. And the worries about our nation, the division you see, the disunity of Nigeria you see on social media, if it was physical, it would be horrible. It would be worse than any kind of war.
To an extent, it's physical, because what happens in social media ends up happening in real life. It's sad that where you just talked about Plateau State, and you mentioned that the president could be going there. Part of what led to what is happening in Plateau State, the attack happened. We need to separate that. Yeah. But what followed after the attack, including the tension that we monitored today, a significant part of it is driven by social media. So I think it's absolutely important that ahead of these elections, we take into consideration. So NIDA, which is an arm of course, the Ministry of Communication, was part of the conversation. And in discussing the social media space, their contribution was vital. They are also going to be part of the expert group that would look at this framework of the toolkit that I mentioned. So again, it's going to be physical space, and then also this social media space. The challenge for us as a country is that these social media platforms are not regulated internally, and that's the huge challenge that we need to as a country. And
we need to work.
We need to work on. But the beauty is that the conversation is being had, and from what we've heard from NIDA, they are aware of the risk. But then to take it to INEC, part of the conversation we had with the chairman of INEC in a recent conference that we were invited is that he should strengthen his risk management department to identify the risk and then to put controls so that we don't wake up with these huge problems that are...
Thank you so much, Dr. Kabir Adamu. We'll let him know that Governor Caleb Mutfwang has met with President Bola Tinubu at the presidential villa, and the president has changed his plan of going to Ikperu to meet with Governor Dapo Abiodun in launching or flagging off the airport and the new aircraft. The president will now head to Jos first, go to Ikperu on Saturday, then head back to Lagos. But that's how we end the program tonight. Many thanks everyone for watching. I'm Sean Wakimale. God bless Nigeria.